This video was made possible thanks to the support from my patrons. Pledge today and you can be involved in what videos get made next, and also get early access to them. Link in the description. Oh boy, this one's got some baggage to it. Not just the history of how the massacre came about, written by John Lucarotti, except not really, but I'll explain in a minute, but because this is considered to be an era-defining serial. A favourite of actor Peter Purves, The Massacre of St. Bartholomew's Eve is a serial that is thought to be one of the darkest and most dramatically impactful stories in all of classic Doctor Who, with William Hartnell playing a villain role alongside companion Stephen being the unambiguous main character. It's a wild departure from anything Doctor Who had attempted before and debatably since, but before we dive too deeply in, let me back up. So, the Daleks' master plan had just finished filming, and the team were just done. 12 weeks of back-to-back epic Terry Nation and Dennis Spooner scripts, and the behind-the-scenes difficulties had driven John Wiles over the edge, and he handed in his resignation, with script editor Donald Tosh joining him as a sign of solidarity. But they still had to fulfill a story obligation to Marco Polo and the Aztecs writer John Lucarotti, who had been commissioned to write another historical by prior script editor Dennis Spooner. Lucarotti was initially given free rein to write whatever he wanted and started developing a plot revolving around the Vikings' first Atlantic crossing in 1000 AD. As he was writing, he got a call from Donald Tosh, who asked him if he wanted to write another script for Doctor Who, unaware that he had already been commissioned. Tosh told Lucarotti to carry on as he was, and he submitted his Viking script, only for it to be turned down because of the recent broadcast of The Time Meddler, which also involved Vikings. This, coupled with a script that was also declined the previous year, set in India, John was understandably frustrated, and he, along with his agent, convinced Donald Tosh to let him have another go, as he was guaranteed paid work by his predecessor. It was apparently Tosh who suggested the 1572 Huguenot massacre as an idea for Lucarotti to work with, and a script was delivered in less than 2 weeks. The scripts were then sent back because he had to incorporate a brand new companion after Katarina was hurriedly killed off in the Daleks' master plan. But wait, there's more! After rewrites, Wiles and Tosh were still unhappy with the scripts, but rather than mess around at Lucarotti anymore, they paid him for his work and Tosh did extensive rewrites, allegedly to be more faithful to the historical setting and to accommodate holidays that William Hartnell had requested.
But wait! There's more!
When Lucarotti heard about these rewrites, he asked for his name to be removed from the credits, but his agent talked him out of this. So the massacre is credited to John Lucarotti, but it's considered to mainly be Donald Tosh's work. The different visions between the two writers would be made even more apparent in 1987, when Lucarotti wrote the target novelization for the massacre, which is a wildly different story than what was broadcast. Why can Doctor Who history never be simple? Speaking of history, let's actually start diving into this serial. So, the TARDIS lands in medieval France, though the Doctor and companion Stephen Taylor don't know the date yet. The Doctor wants to use this opportunity to explore 16th century apothecaries and elects to go visit Charles Preslan, a man exploring germ theory. Stephen is left on his own in a French tavern, which is currently being occupied by a group of Protestants, aka Huguenots. You see, we're in the French War of Religions, and tensions are running high in France, with the recent wedding of the Catholic Queen Marguerite to the Protestant King Henry of Navarre, a marriage intended to heal the religious rift between the two sides. However, with some of the highest ranking Protestants all gathered in Paris for the occasion, backroom meetings are taking place and plans are being drawn to wipe out the Huguenots once and for all. One of those involved is the Abbot of Amboise, played by William Hartnell. Stephen is caught in the middle of a conflict he does not understand and has allied himself with people who can't fully trust him, as Stephen tries to survive the last days leading up to the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, and there's no doctor to help him. Now, in terms of missing stories, the massacre is arguably the most missing in Doctor Who history. There are no telesnaps, no off-air video recordings, and only a handful of production stills. I watched the loose cannon reconstruction of the story for this review, and considering the sheer lack of material out there, the team did a great job. One surviving photo, however, seems to indicate that in order for the production team to have the episode's now iconic title cards, the name of the episode in front of artwork by Israel Silvestri, they literally just filmed the artwork with one of the cameras. Really interesting stuff. Anyway, now I'm really conflicted about the massacre, because as a Doctor Who story, I'm really struggling to come up with effective comparisons. The Doctor is hardly in it. It mainly revolves around space astronaut Stephen Taylor in a period he has no knowledge about, and a lot of the story's key scenes don't even involve him, as we've got lengthy dialogue exchanges between French political figures debating what's to be done about the Protestants in their country. Genuinely, it felt so strange to go on to the next episode and hear the Ron Grainer music and see the iconic opening titles, because this doesn't even remotely feel like Doctor Who. Even when compared to other pure historical narratives, the Doctor and Stephen don't even realise that the massacre of St. Bartholomew's Eve, an event which would result in the deaths of anywhere between 10,000 and 30,000 Protestants killed across France in the coming days and weeks, they have no idea that it's about to happen until the last 15 minutes of the last episode, and the Doctor immediately drags Stephen into the TARDIS and they get out of there. As a mood piece, it's a compelling watch, as we watch Stephen, who, just to remind you folks, is an astronaut from the 24th century, stumble around 16th century France and having no idea what to do with himself. I think this image from the loose cannon reconstruction of part 1 sums up the massacre nicely. A hapless Stephen sat alone in the corner of the tavern, waiting for the Doctor to come pick him up, like the last child outside of the school gates waiting for a parent to pick them up. It's adorable. And this is our main character. Stephen is educated, clearly, but he doesn't necessarily know about French history. He's from a future where the political and religious status quo has not been established, so of course he doesn't have a clue about the numerous French war of religions. Stephen's role as audience surrogate in this serial is the most effective thing the massacre has going for it. We're not dealing with a story like the Aztecs, where Barbara is well studied on the Aztec people, or the Crusade, where Vicky knows King Richard's quest for Palestine, and I noted in my reviews of those stories that I wish the audience was more clued into the historical setting, but in the massacre, Stephen is clueless, so the obfuscation over what's happening in the days leading up to the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre is an easier pill to swallow here. It also means that Stephen's new friends, the Protestants or the Huguenots in the French tavern, have to actively fill him in on recent events.
Tell us exactly what you heard.
Just the word that made me stop, sir. My father died at Vassy, and
What are you all talking about? 10 years ago at Vassy, a small town some miles south of Paris, 100 Huguenots were slaughtered by the Catholics.
Why? Because they were Huguenots.
And yes, I did say the days leading up to the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. The massacre has a pretty big scope, as each episode takes place over the span of a full day, leading up to the titular Bell of Doom ringing on the day that the massacre started. In fact, while each episode has a defined cliffhanger, the next episode picks up several hours later, and there's no recap or clip from the previous episode. This was clearly a trend of the John Wiles and Donald Tosh era of the show. The Mythmakers and the Daleks Master Plan would frequently just pick up some time later with no recap, but in the massacre, the way it's applied helps to build the sense of dread that many members of the audience know is coming. There's no Doctor here to save the day. Stephen is lost and alone in a foreign country in a foreign time, caught in the middle of a conflict he can't begin to understand, and making matters more complicated is the Abbot of Amboise, who Stephen sees in part 2, and it appears to be the Doctor in disguise.
Well. The abbot has come himself, and all for the sake of a servant.
That's the Doctor talking to Roger Colbert.
I must go to him. Thank you for all your help. One moment. Yes? You say that man is your friend? Yes. And how long have you been working for the Abbot of Amboise? What?
Now, we'll talk about William Hartnell's performance and the logistics of this multi-rolling later on, but it's extraordinary what this casting choice does in regards to Stephen's character. Stephen has currently aligned himself with the Huguenots, but he then seems to recognise the abbot as a friend of his, which immediately sows doubt in the Huguenots' minds. But Stephen isn't just making stuff up here. The idea that the Doctor might be working undercover and adopting a disguise, it's not an unfounded one. Not only is there precedent for this in the past, but more specifically, there's precedent for it in stories that Stephen was in, like when the Doctor disguised himself as Zephon in the Daleks' Master Plan, or pretended to be Zeus in the Mythmakers. Stephen has been on many adventures with the Doctor at this point, and the massacre shows that Stephen trusts him completely. The two may bicker and argue, but when Stephen finds himself at his most isolated and afraid, having no idea what the Doctor is doing, his faith in his friend shines through.
It is just possible that the Doctor is pretending to be the Abbot. For what reason? Where can I find the Abbot? So that you can get further instructions. Nicholas, please believe me. I know nothing about Vassy or the Catholics or half of what you talk about. If the Doctor is pretending to be the Abbot, then it's for a very good reason. Please let me go to him. Should I find out that there is a plot of some kind, I'll come back and tell you.
Yes, having my friend the Doctor be one of the leaders of the enemies of my friends looks bad, but he's clearly done this for a good reason and I trust him. This faith in the Doctor manifests itself brilliantly when it comes to Anne Chaplet, played by Annette Robertson. She's a servant of the Cardinal and overhears him and his men planning an upcoming massacre. She flees and is followed by soldiers, but then bumps into Stephen. And he can't help but be compelled by Anne when he bumps into her. He can't help but get involved against his better nature. But later on, he decides to take Anne back to the Cardinal's house where the Abbot will be. His reasoning is that the Doctor is in disguise as the Abbot and will get him and Anne to safety. However, when Stephen gets there, it looks like, to the untrained eye, he immediately betrays Anne.
What is this?
My Lord Abbot.
Doctor! Silence! Who is this man? And why does he disturb my peace?
It appears he comes from a dying man.
Well?
I brought back the servant who ran away.
You have done well, my son.
And what's more, after this meeting, the only face-to-face meeting that Stephen and the Abbot have in this serial, Stephen is even more convinced that the Abbot is the Doctor, which makes him sink to rock bottom when he and a crowd of angry Catholics find the dead body of the Abbot on the streets outside his house. Stephen believes the Doctor to be dead, and since he's apparently changed his clothes to adopt this elaborate disguise, Stephen has no hope of finding the TARDIS key to get away. It's really powerful drama, and absolute full credit goes to Peter Purves. He does carry the story. It's a great performance. In the series, he's always been a very versatile actor, from a leader to a follower to a comedian, and here he's a great dramatic force. And I think having the Doctor and the Abbot played by Hartnell and upending Stephen's relationship with the Doctor by those means was a stroke of genius. It's just a shame that the massacre is such a haphazardly structured story outside of that. Now, John Lucarotti and Donald Tosh's dialogue and characterization is really strong. There's great camaraderie between the Huguenots, and Chaplet is a very sympathetic character, and the scenes of French officials in back rooms and plotting the massacre of the Huguenots is very well performed. John Tillinger is terrific as Simon Duval, a Catholic who is a servant to the Marshal who investigates the French tavern and asks about Stephen. Listen to how his voice changes based on when he's talking in hushed tones to the bartender, and then to Stephen, who he's trying to curry the favour of.
Where's the girl?
The girl?
The girl who played in here this morning. What happened to her?
I don't know. I was down in the cellar, and when I came up, there she was being questioned by the Huguenots.
The Vicomte de Lerand, Nicholas Muth?
Yes, and another man.
Who?
He's still here. Over there.
Who is he?
I don't know. A stranger. English, I think.
Go on.
The Vicomte left hurriedly once they'd finished with the girl.
Thank you, my friend. Good evening.
A stranger to this city.
Yes?
I thought you must be. Most wise people are at home by this time. It's almost time for the curfew.
Obviously, we don't have the surviving video of this story, but I'm glad that we have the audio so we can hear that performance. Speaking of voices, we've also got Eric Thompson as the Huguenot Gaston, and he's great as well, but it's hard to hear his voice and not instantly think back to his narration for the original The Magic Roundabout, which he was involved in around this time. I don't hear Gaston in The Massacre. I hear Dougal.
No, is everybody's mug filled? Yes. Then drink to Henry of Navarre, our Protestant prince.
What? Man the lifeboats! Man the bomb! The dam's burst! Is Midnighty on fire? Vote Conservative! Keep off the grass! What?
Anyway, it's how the narrative forms and what it does with these otherwise positive elements that makes it a struggle to get through. I know it's sacrilegious to fans of this serial, but structurally, The Massacre is a bloody mess. Take part 2, for example. We've got Stephen, who overhears that someone nicknamed the Sea Beggar is going to be killed, and the episode takes him back and forth from the Admiral's house to Presland's place to find the Doctor, back to the Admiral's, then to the Abbot, back to the Admiral's, then he just wanders the streets of Paris waiting for the plot to kick back in, finds Anne, and then they head back to Presland's. Then the audience, not Stephen, learn that this Sea Beggar, the driving mystery for this episode to the point where it's the episode's name, is the Admiral, a character who has not only done nothing to drive the serial story forward, but hasn't even met either of our main characters. What is the point? This driving point for a whole quarter of the serial's runtime is excised completely from John Lucarotti's novelization. That's how inconsequential it is. And this structure, as well as character logistics, also unravels when it comes to the Abbot's inclusion and the decision to have him played by William Hartnell. But like I said, that is such a complex path to take that I will talk about it later. There's a lot of scenes that involve neither Stephen or the Doctor or the Abbot of officials talking about local politics, and I have no idea what they're talking about. They're talking about funding their armies, going to war with the Dutch, and I'm sorry, what's this got to do with the immediate stakes of the story? Like I said, there are some great scenes where Stephen is clued into the local political climate, but these scenes just read as any other historical drama on the BBC, except without any sort of appropriate lead-in.
Interested in the Dutch at last, Marshal Tavan?
Ah, Admiral de Coligny. I didn't hear you come in.
I hope you are looking into the plight of the unfortunate Dutch. The Sea Beggars, as you call them. Their fight with Spain is a just one.
So you frequently tell us in council.
Your only quarrel with the Dutch is that they are Protestant and not Catholic.
That could also be the reason why you support them. But rest assured, Admiral, we are examining their claim for France's aid.
It makes no damn sense. Compels me, though.
Take this scene from part 4, where the Queen Mother, Catherine, played by Joan Young, presents the Marshal Gaspard, played by André Morel, the order signed by the King to begin the massacre.
The good people of Paris know their enemies. They will take care of them.
The good people? Madame, if you rouse the mob, the innocent will perish with the guilty.
Innocent? Heresy can have no innocence. France will breathe the purer air after tomorrow.
And Navarre, madame, your son-in-law, is he to be slaughtered with the others?
Tomorrow, Henry of Navarre will pay for his pretensions to the crown.
Madame, we must not kill Navarre.
Must not.
Like, this doesn't even make sense in the context of its own setting. Catherine is said in this story to be the one who drew up the Treaty of Religious Tolerance.
The treaty drawn up by the Queen Mother to conclude the religious difficulties of the country was generous in the extreme to the free thinkers.
She also arranged the marriage of her Catholic daughter to a Protestant to quell tensions, so did she do this and not think about the potential consequences, or is she ordering a massacre based on her own inability to problem solve? There's a lot of this in The Massacre, and oh boy does it make it a slog at times. I have a high tolerance for fluff in Doctor Who, but I cannot imagine being a young fan of the show in the mid-60s, let's say between the ages of 7 and 12, and enjoying The Massacre. For parents, there's not enough prerequisite, and for kids, there's not enough Doctor and Steven. It's no wonder the story hemorrhaged viewers during its original broadcast, but we'll put another pin in that and talk about it later. And oh god, okay, it feels unfair to put another pin in without removing a previous one, so let's talk about Hartnell as the Doctor and the Abbot. So the Doctor leaves Steven in that tavern and goes to speak to Preslan, played by Eric Chitty, and the two get this lovely introductory scene where Preslan is initially skeptical about this stranger to the extent where he doesn't even reveal his identity yet, but he lowers his guard when he realizes he's talking to a fellow scientist.
You're not French. No. Yet you know of Preslan? Yes, in Science News Travels. Yes, and there's a man in Germany at the moment who's working on optics, trying to make a machine which will enable Preslan to see these small creatures. He calls them germs. Is it so? Are they really doing this? Yes. So now, doesn't this encourage you to continue with your theories, Monsieur Preslan? Yes, I am Charles Preslan. Forgive me, but in these days one has to be careful. Of course, my dear fellow. But I'm extremely curious about your work, Monsieur Preslan.
The Doctor gets chummy with Preslan, learns that there's a man called the Abbot of Amboise who wants him dead, and the Doctor wonders aloud if there's a way to rectify this. Then, the next time that the audience see William Hartnell is during the episode's close, where Colbert, the Abbot's secretary who we saw following the Doctor out of the tavern appearing to recognise him, is speaking with the Abbot, and the audience sees that he's played by William Hartnell.
Forgive me, Father Abbot, but the missing girl is at the house of Admiral de Coligny.
Fetch her tomorrow. Bring her to me.
Note how the ending credits retain their usual Doctor Who played by William Hartnell text. However, for parts 2 and 3, episodes where the Doctor does not seem to appear at all, it's replaced by Abbot of Amboise, played by William Hartnell. This is a pretty big deal, keeping in mind that William Hartnell still had his customary contractually obligated credit in Mission to the Unknown, a story where he did not even appear. It's a great piece of metatext that throws the audience off their game, much like Steven. Now, the inspiration to have Hartnell play the villain came from Hartnell himself, who wanted to showcase his range and play a role without as much technobabble. Playing a robotic doppelganger in The Chase clearly was not something he wanted to repeat. In fact, he apparently wanted to play the Doctor's evil son. Due to the limitations of the technology of the time and the fact that TV was recorded as live so he could not play against himself properly, the Abbot and the Doctor could not both heavily feature in the same episode. Also, Hartnell had requested a holiday, which is why the Abbot's role in Part 2 is a silent pre-filmed insert. This results in a great idea, but a pretty bad execution. We hardly see the Abbot in this serial. He's talked about a lot in hushed tones throughout the serial, but when he finally shows up proper, in Part 3, it's Hartnell doing a strange inflection for, and I timed it, 2 minutes and 50 seconds. In a 4-part story, there's just not enough screen time for Hartnell to make an impact, and obviously the episodes are lost so we can't properly judge, but from what we have here, I don't think Hartnell is very good. I'm sure he offered the same stern authority that he applied to many other roles across his career, but when you think William Hartnell plays a Doctor Who villain, I don't think this performance as the Abbot meets that threshold, in my opinion. Now, in fairness, Hartnell is reported to have had a great time recording The Massacre, mainly because he appeared to greatly respect director Paddy Russell. Yes, the first female director in Doctor Who history. Due to being such a strong personality, which I imagine you have to be as a woman in television in the 60s, Hartnell deferred to her direction, with her apparently being able to get Hartnell to play the role of the Abbot differently on cue by saying, "The doctor's showing," which would cause Bill to change completely. It's a shame that Paddy's direction on the massacre has been lost, especially as the camera scripts, which do survive, seem to suggest very mobile cameras and a lot of dynamic movement, something you can't really recapture in recreations. It can also be assumed that she would work really well with actors, owed to the acclaimed talent working on this serial. You even have members of the film crew involved in large crowd scenes, including Paddy Russell herself. It would have been interesting to see what director John Crockett would have done with the massacre, as he directed John Lucarotti's prior scripts, episode 4 of Marco Polo and the entirety of the Aztecs. However, and I swear this is true, by the filming of the massacre, Crockett had retired and devoted his life to Catholicism, spending the remaining 20 years of his life at Pricknash Abbey in Stroud, which is where he's buried. God, for a story revolving around Catholicism, that's one hell of a coincidence. Speaking of which, it's also worth noting that while the massacre isn't the most historically accurate story, the inspiration for the Doctor impersonating the Abbot of Amboise comes from a real historical case. You see, there actually was no Abbot of Amboise. There's no abbey in the town. Now, there was an abbey and an abbot in Marmoutier, which was ransacked by Huguenots in 1562, and shortly after, a man called Chastelain travelled the area claiming to be the Abbot of Marmoutier at Amboise, encouraging locals to occupy the now damaged abbey. He was discovered by municipal authorities and executed. This cannot be a coincidence, and it makes me wonder whether or not the idea from the outset was that the Doctor is impersonating the Abbot. Now, whether or not this is the case or was written out by Donald Tosh is something we'll never know. Lucarotti and Tosh's stories directly conflict with each other, though to be fair, Tosh was not always regarded as the most accurate orator for Doctor Who's history, but the end result is a good idea executed badly. In fact, the Abbot as a villain is so bad at his job that he's ultimately killed when an assassination attempt of the Admiral goes wrong and the Catholics blame him for it, claiming it could have been an inside job.
It is strange, Father Abbot, that since you came, everything which had been so carefully planned has gone wrong. This man is a traitor to the Queen. Kill him.
I'm in danger!
But, once again, it seems almost fitting for the massacre, a story about dual natures, two visions of the historical event being torn apart and mashed together by Lucarotti and Tosh despite incompatible visions, where the Catholics and the Huguenots are taking different meanings from the same text, how the Doctor and the Abbot are two different men ideologically but have the same face, how the story ends with the Doctor arriving and taking Stephen away from a massacre as Stephen wants to defy the Doctor's callousness and lack of desire to change history and save the people who he has befriended over the past 3 days, how history cannot be changed in a story where the Protestants, a sect of Christianity who believe in fate and predestination, are massacred. Now, I believe that the past paragraph or so is just me reading way too deeply into any potential subtext here. I actually think very little thought has gone into the additional meanings of the massacre. For example, an chaplet, well, a chaplet is a type of prayer common in Catholicism, but for some reason it's the surname of a Huguenot servant. Also, there's very little commentary on the classism on display in the Huguenot ranks, with Gaston showing nothing less than disdain for the, quote, common people of Paris.
Forgive me, monsieur, but, well, I'm sure he's a stranger here. He knows nothing about anything, or what's going on in Paris. Why, he don't even know about the royal wedding.
Get out of here.
But, monsieur...
Get out! You're too kind to these nothings.
There's only a single mention from either the Catholic or Protestant side of the conflict about Stephen's Englishness, considering that in 1572 the Queen of England was Queen Elizabeth I, a Protestant. This should play a much bigger part of the story, but it simply doesn't. And this lack of thought ultimately breaks the massacre. And once again, it comes back to the Doctor as the Abbot. So part 3 ends with the Abbot dead in the streets. A few scenes later, the Doctor shows up at the TARDIS, and his absence is literally never explained.
Perhaps he went away somewhere with the apothecary who used to live here.
With Presler? No, he couldn't.
Why not?
Because Presler is either dead or in prison.
He is not.
Doctor!
I thought you were dead. Nope.
Where was the Doctor for the past 3 days? Never addressed. In a story decision, Lucarotti wound up calling, quote, unforgivable. The Doctor does not react to Stephen explaining that he has a physical doppelganger in 16th century Paris.
It'd be easy to leave Paris in the morning, monsieur. Tomorrow's St. Bartholomew's Day and everyone will be celebrating.
And all the trouble that's going on, I can't see what they've got to celebrate.
I told you not to get involved.
Look, I tried not to. But the abbot did look like you. If I hadn't found out about Admiral de Coligny being the Seebecker...
That's that? Did you say tomorrow was St. Bartholomew's Day, Charles? What year is this, my boy?
I don't know. What difference does it make?
What date is it, Charles?
Date, monsieur? August the 23rd.
Yes, I know that. The year.
And not only that, he has no idea that it's St. Bartholomew's Day Eve. What has he been doing? The lapse in logic is so big that it's pretty unanimous amongst fans that this is the story that the Doctor's in the middle of when he's kidnapped in the 20th anniversary special, The Five Doctors. It would explain why the Doctor has no idea what's going on. Heck, the Target novel seems to allude to this as well. Either way, this is a logistical nightmare. You see, in part 1, when the Doctor leaves the tavern to attend his business, he bumps into Roger Colbert, the abbot's secretary, who follows him, presumably because he recognises him as his boss. Then at the end of the episode, we see Roger with the abbot at the cliffhanger ending. So if the abbot isn't the Doctor, what happened here? Roger never brings up the similarity in appearance, and there's no acknowledgement of this mix-up. Now, that seems like a nitpick, and it kind of is, but there's loads of discrepancies in the massacre that are like this. They accumulate over the 3 episodes. You've got all these key players of the story in the tavern in part 1, but no one seems to recognise that Stephen is with someone who is the spitting image of the abbot, their enemy. Preslan, despite knowing full well he's being hunted and persecuted by the abbot, does not blink or do a double take when someone who looks identical to him knocks on his door and enters. The Doctor knows enough about Preslan to clarify he's an entirely fictional character for this story. The Doctor knows enough about him to know his address and his field of work, but to not know that Preslan is living in the middle of the French War of Religions? Did he spend the past few days helping Preslan to escape the country? If so, then did the Doctor not ask what Preslan was escaping from? He's had 3 days. Like, the Doctor knew enough about Preslan to know where he lived during this time, so this doesn't stack up. And this brings us to the biggest moral contradiction in the story. The Doctor appears to assist Preslan, even giving him information on other scientists across Europe who are also studying germ theory, but the Doctor does not cave into Stephen's request to save Anne Chaplet from the impending massacre. He tells her to just go back to the abbots and stay indoors, and leaves Anne to her fate, leading to a lengthy epilogue to the massacre. The bell tolls on St. Bartholomew's Day, and thousands of Huguenots are killed across Paris. Something that seems to break Stephen, and his faith in the Doctor. You get this scene where Stephen just lists off all of the people he's grown to care for over the past few days, and the Doctor just coldly responds, "Oh yeah, they're all dead." It's so grim.
Did they all die?
Yes, most of them. About 10,000 in Paris alone.
The Admiral?
Yes.
Nicholas? You had to leave Anne Chaplet there to die. The girl was with me. If you brought her with her, she needn't have died. But no, you had to leave her there to be slaughtered.
Well, it is possible, of course. She didn't die, and I was right to leave her.
Possible? Look, how possible? That girl was already hunted by the Catholic Guards. If they killed 10,000, how did they spare her? You don't know, do you? You can't say for certain that you weren't responsible for that girl's death.
I was not responsible.
Oh, no. You just sent her back to her aunt's house where the guards were waiting to catch her. I tell you this much, Doctor. Wherever this machine of yours lands next, I'm getting off. If your researchers have so little regard for human life, then I want no part.
And good to his word, Stephen leaves as soon as the TARDIS has landed, but the Doctor, characteristically, wants the last word.
Bye. My dear Stephen, history sometimes gives us a terrible shock. And that is because we don't quite fully understand. Why should we? After all, we're all too small to realize its final pattern. Therefore, don't try and judge it from where you stand. I was right to do as I did. Yes, that I firmly believe.
And we get this really lovely and quiet moment of William Hartnell alone in this massive ship, reminiscing about all of the people he's lost over his adventures.
Even after all this time, he cannot understand. I dare not change the course of history. Well, at least I taught him to take some precautions. He did remember to look at the scanner before he opened the doors. Now, they're all gone. All gone. None of them could understand. Not even my little Susan. Or Vicky. And as for Barbara and Chesterton, they were all too impatient to get back to their own time. And now, Steve. Perhaps I should go home. Back to my own planet. But I can't.
It's a rare moment of pure vulnerability for the First Doctor. It's wonderful. I love the way that it seems to dovetail perfectly with how the Doctor has treated time in the past, how Barbara wanted to save the Aztecs, but...
You can't rewrite history, not one line!
And in the Reign of Terror, there was nothing that could be done to prevent Robespierre from being executed.
I'm afraid so, and we can't stem the tide. But at least we can stop being carried away with the flood.
The use of the word flood there is telling. No, the Doctor does not treat the sanctity of history as something in a religious sense. It's not a belief system. It's more akin to a force of nature. The Doctor can see that, but he thinks that his human companions and even his granddaughter Susan could not. Is this conceited? Probably, but the Doctor is pretty firmly set in his ways, and in this moment, that alienates him emotionally. He's had these adventures, travelled across the vast recesses of space and time, but all the while he's been surrounded by people who never truly understood him. And even though he could go back to his own people, for reasons the Doctor won't elaborate on, he can't. Even though we've seen a new side to the Doctor here, the question Doctor Who is still intact. Unfortunately, this wonderful moment of contemplation and the potential nature of time travel is undercut in the following moments, as the TARDIS has landed in 1960s London, and a young woman, nicknamed Dodo, played by Jackie Lane, rushes into the TARDIS as there's been an accident outside, and she wanted to call a policeman. The ship is a telephone box after all.
Who are you?
Where's the telephone?
What did you say?
The telephone. I've got to ring up.
Oh, pull yourself together, child. I think you've made a mistake.
Who are you? Are you the police?
Oh, good gracious, of course not.
Well, this is a police box. It says so outside.
Yes, I know, but it isn't You know what I mean. Now run along and find another police boss.
Okay, firstly, not only is this a massive tonal shift, but you've got a young woman bursting into the TARDIS, and she seems to not have any questions about the old man inside, the interior dimensions. She just goes along with the idea that it's a space-time machine. And then Stephen returns for no reason.
Child.
Quick! You've got to take off!
Oh, so you come back, my boy!
Yes, I've come back. We can't go into that now. There are 2 policemen coming over the common towards the TARDIS.
Coming here? Good gracious, they'll want to use the telephone. Thank you.
Stephen losing faith in the Doctor, potentially coming back to reconcile their differences? No, none of that. There's nothing here. He just returns because the script says so, and the emotional angle of this serial will never be brought up again. However, we do learn something about Dodo.
What is your name, child?
Dodo.
What?
Dorothea, really. Dorothea Chaplet.
Chaplet? Yes, but you're not French, are you?
Don't be daft. Your granddad wants to.
Doctor, it's not possible, is it? Chaplet and great...
Yes, it is possible, my boy. Very possible.
It seems that Anne did actually survive the massacre, and Dodo, real name Dorothea, is a distant descendant. Now, logistically, this is a nightmare, because Anne was a woman from 16th century France, so how did the family name Chaplet survive the centuries? Unless she married a cousin or something. Now, there are theories that Stephen actually fathered Anne's child during the story, but there's nothing in the actual broadcast version to suggest this, and Anne, depending on the version of the story that you're engaging in, is only 15, so let's not open that can of worms. I hate the execution of this so much. But I like the idea that history, like the weather, can give and take. Sometimes it will take away the people you care about or take things away from you, or it can gift you a little miracle. That Anne did indeed survive, and then the TARDIS immediately took the Doctor and Stephen somewhere that this revelation could play out. The problem is that, once again, I think this subtext is entirely unintentional, and Donald Tosh did not consider any logistics here. Firstly, the Doctor is apparently able to save Preslan and get him out of the city before the massacre, and Barbara can save Priest Orklock in the Aztecs, but the Doctor will not directly save Anne from the massacre. Not to ascribe great man theory or anything, but surely the tide of history won't be too drastically affected by the Doctor helping a Protestant servant girl escape Paris, right? This hypocrisy is never brought up in the story, presumably because pointing it out would undercut everything that happens in the final episode. And the story also needs a workaround for why the Doctor and Stephen can't take Anne in the TARDIS with them, but they can with Dodo. You see, it's clear with the benefit of hindsight that John Wiles and Donald Tosh had no idea what to do with the female companion role. After writing Vicky out because Maureen O'Brien spoke ill of the script of Galaxy 4, they then created her replacement in The Mythmakers, Katarina, only for her to be killed off in the following serial before the actor had even filmed her introductory episode, because Wiles and Tosh did not want to deal with a character who would need all of the science and the history explained to them. We then had Jean Marsh in the Daleks' Master Plan as Sarah Kingdom, who was allegedly offered the role of the companion but turned it down, not to mention there may have been some legal issues with the Terry Nation estate, as she was a character that he might want to use for a Dalek spin-off series. Then we have Anne Chaplet, who was meant to be the new companion again, only for Wiles and Tosh to realise midway through writing that she'd have the same issue as Katarina, and then hastily wrote Dodo in. Evidence of this last-minute decision exists in the camera scripts where, for one stage direction in the last scene, Dodo is referred to as Anne. It's an utter mess, or, to quote Peter Purves in Doctor Who magazine issue 483, John Wiles was an idiot. He tried very hard to get rid of Bill. He also wanted to get rid of me. 5 girls, total confusion. I didn't respect him. I didn't think he knew what he was doing. Now, the fact that Dodo just walks into the TARDIS and doesn't even ask about its alien nature and is just whisked away is, in my opinion, way more egregious than having a historical companion who might need context for their future adventures. Not to mention the formula of Doctor and future companion and historical companion would ultimately pay off in the show's next era. And the story ends. Dodo is essentially kidnapped by two total strangers because one of them is reminded of his granddaughter by her appearance.
Don't you think she looks rather like my grandchild, Susan?
Yes, I've never met your granddaughter.
Oh, no, of course not, no. Yes, but she does, you know.
And that's the end. Cut to credits. What on earth is this? It's at this point where I'd give a bit of background to the casting of Jackie Lane, but this review is already so long, and we've covered so much ground that I feel like it's just better saved until next time, to be frank. And we have to deal with the serial's aftermath as well. John Lucarotti never wrote for the show again, outside of the first drafts of the season 12 story, The Ark in Space, which wound up being extensively rewritten by the then script editor Robert Holmes, but he did adapt his credited stories into Target novels, with The Massacre being a massive departure from the TV version. And before you wonder whether or not it's his original vision, it's not, because upon receiving the commission to adapt The Massacre, he went through his own notes and his own original draft, and he wasn't happy with them. So 20 years wiser, and with more research of France under his belt, he adapted a drastically different story, which, oh god, how long is this video? Okay, we won't go into detail now, that's a video for another time, but suffice it to say, it's a pretty wild adaptation, with the framing device of the Doctor alone in a garden talking with the Time Lords about interfering with Earth history, him and Stephen cottoning on almost right away that they've landed days before the massacre. The Doctor actively does impersonate the Abbot of Amboise multiple times, the real Abbot tries to exorcise the TARDIS by setting fire to it, and the novel clarifies that Dodo's heritage mainly stems from Anne Chaplet's never-mentioned brother, Raoul. It's a great read, and it's clear that Lucarotti never forgave Donald Tosh's assertion that his initial draft was historically inaccurate, with the opening author notes passive-aggressively noting that the events described in the book are real. A few years later, in 1990, Lucarotti also wrote a short story in Doctor Who magazine 167 entitled Brief Encounter, later named in reprints The Meeting, the last thing that Lucarotti ever wrote for the show, and it features him in the same French tavern in The Massacre having an imagined, or maybe not, meeting with the First Doctor. About the middle of last October, I popped in for a glass of Medoc, one of my favourite wines, and was just about to order it when a voice behind me said,
"Ah, Lucarotti. You'll take this one with me, I trust."
The voice was unmistakable, and when I turned to face the Doctor, he smiled at me.
"Remember all this?
He asked with a gesture at our surroundings.
1590-something. And those two young bloods, Gaston de... what's his name, and that other one, the Huguenot fellow."
I remembered all too well. Gaston was the Huguenot, Simon Duval the Catholic, but I knew better than to correct him.
"So, what'll it be,
he asked.
Medoc,"
I stammered.
"Jimmy Doc,"
he said to the waiter as we sat at a table.
"What are you doing here?"
I blurted.
"Visiting you,"
he replied.
"But the Time Lords retired you ages ago."
The waiter served our wine, and the Doctor clinked my glass with his.
"Mustn't lose touch with old friends,"
he replied with a wink, and sipped his wine. I took a big swig of mine. It's a lovely piece, made more profound when you consider that Lucarotti and Hartnell were actually good friends in real life, and John Lucarotti passed away 4 years later at the age of 68, fittingly in Paris, France. Now, the show at this point had pretty much peaked in terms of regular viewership, with the show's second season, with stories like the Dalek invasion of Earth, The Rescue, Romans, Web Planet, getting anywhere from 10 to 13 million viewers. While that audience had dipped for season 3, with Galaxy 4 and the Daleks' Master Plan watched by around 9 million people, we can see the viewing figures during the massacre just start to plummet. Part 1, seen by 8 million people, is then followed by Part 2, which was seen by 6 million, then 5.9, then 5.8. The Massacre is the first story in Doctor Who's history where each episode was seen by fewer people than the last, and Part 4's viewership of 5.8 million was the lowest that Doctor Who had seen since its first episode was disrupted by the Kennedy assassination. While millions would return for subsequent stories, The Massacre was clearly the first big dent in the show's armour. John Wiles sensed that he was about to be fired, and rather than have that happen, he quit. And Donald Tosh also quit, meaning that he could share a screenwriting credit on Part 4 of The Massacre with Luca Rotti as he was training up his successor, Jerry Davis. But more on him next time. Now, The Massacre. Phew. It's a fascinating piece of Doctor Who history. As you can tell by the length of this video, there's so much interesting trivia, from the making of to its structural problems, potential narrative meaning, its baffling ending, and the serial's creative legacy and the impact on the show's immediate future. It's been way more interesting and engaging making this video than actually watching The Massacre, which is well acted, presumably well directed, and thematically interesting. It just does not come together. It's frequently moving, but good luck finding any coherent connective tissue amongst those scattershot 4 episodes, or finding the multi-rolling of William Hartnell in this serial to be interesting outside of the fun trivia of, oh, Hartnell's the villain in this one. There clearly is something buried beneath Donald Tosh's redraft of The Massacre. Paddy Russell said that she took the job of director because it was a rare good Doctor Who script. Her words, not mine. And Peter Purves has spoken very highly of the story at conventions and in interviews, which makes sense. He does carry it, and he does an exceptional job at it. I just don't think it works. I won't be rewatching The Massacre for some time. But damn, I don't think I'll be able to stop thinking about it for a while. Ultimately though, even if The Massacre had been outstanding and well regarded by audiences, I can see why they started switching off. Obviously, I don't know what John Wiles's and Donald Tosh's principles were, but the outcome of their work made for deeply cynical and violent Doctor Who. Think about Season 3 of the show so far. It started with the pulp fun sci-fi story Galaxy 4, which ended in the planet's destruction and the death of the villains. Then you've got Mission to the Unknown, which ends with the death of its protagonists and a Dalek victory. The Mythmakers showcases the brutal fall of Troy. Then you've got the Daleks' master plan, which sees 3 companion characters die, and now we're going straight into the deaths of an estimated 30,000 Protestants due to religious persecution. If you're a regular Doctor Who fan at this time, your Saturday nights for the past 6 months have been depressing, and it was time for a change behind the scenes, which we'll get to next time, as we bid goodbye to producer John Wiles and say hello to Dodo in her first proper story, where 10 million years into the future, and the Doctor, Stephen and Dodo are tasked with saving a group of humans and the alien monoids from an illness on board their generation ship, nicknamed the Ark. I'll see you folks next time. Hey folks, thank you so much for watching this review of The Massacre. Going into it, I did not think that it would be my longest single review to date, but that's just how it turned out. It turns out there's a lot of history, there's a lot of interesting stuff associated with The Massacre, including but not limited to that Brief Encounters Doctor Who magazine write-up by John Lucarotti. Thank you so much to Bohush Blahut and Stephen Noonan for providing the voices of Lucarotti and the Doctor respectively. If you enjoyed this video and appreciate all the work and everything that goes into the making of these reviews, then be sure to hit that like button and also subscribe so you can keep up to date on all future Doctor Who videos, and leave any comment below in the comment section to appease the almighty algorithm. You can also help to support these reviews by becoming a patron, where you can get access to a Mr. TARDIS Discord server, access to these reviews several weeks or months early, and also get your name in the credits. I'd also like to give a shout out to these particular patrons: Adam Grattan, Alex Dry, Ben Langdon, Callum Baird, Tuba City Blues, Dan the Dreamer Shill, Daniel Davis, Darren Carver-Bausiger, Dean Jones, Dylan Whitaker, Finley Rude, Ginger Animator, Jack D. Evans, Joseph Adams, Lard Dragon Ezra, Leela, Maria Bergman, Mario Fanboy 15, Michael Serrano, Miranda Logan, Nate Harris, Palex, Pat Andrews, Randall Sprinkle, Raven Woods, Reese Lloyd, Ross, Ryan Duncan, Samuel Whitaker, The Evil Dalek, The Brit Sniper, The Doctor 14 Blu-ray Reviews, Timbo 1834, Toby Loxton, and Will. Thanks so much to all of my patrons, thanks to you for watching this video, and I'll see you next time.